Humanity. And I'd like to invite Coralie Miller, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Sadie. I hope this is well positioned. I'm sure you'll tell me if not. In Jamil John Kochai's story, Playing Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, a young boy in modern Sacramento locks his bedroom door to play a video game set in 1984 Afghanistan. Inside the game, he discovers the likenesses of his own father and uncle. And knowing that his uncle was killed just days after the game's setting, the boy mounts a virtual rescue mission. Using the in-game tranquilizer gun, he knocks out both brothers and begins ferrying them away from the specific site where he knows his uncle will die. After intense combat, fleeing Soviet forces, he carries them into a cave system where, as Kochai writes, though you cannot be sure whether your father and his brother are still alive, you keep moving into a darkness so complete that your reflection becomes visible on the screen of the television in front of you, and it is as if the figures in the image were journeying inside you, delving into your flesh, to be saved. This moment is all the more arresting because throughout basically the entire story, the protagonist's own living family, including the father, have been knocking on the door, begging to be let in. I assigned this story to my undergraduate students last weekend, and in class, someone proposed that we offer the plot to ChatGPT. It delivered a story resplendent with triumph. The protagonist of ChatGPT's version successfully rescues the video game uncle, and this leads to a series of tearful and joyous reconciliations between boy and father, boy and world, family and history. There is hope and redemption even in the darkest of times, ChatGPT helpfully informed us. My students spoke, though, about how much more meaning we found in Kochai's version, how it held and invited us into its own tensions, its own antinomies. This refusal to resolve, the boy locking his real father out in order to save the digital double, family both the site of history's wounds and their soul balming, the inescapable always appearing within our venues of escape, animates Kochai's collection The Haunting of Hajji, Hotak, and Other Stories, a book in which parents sew together the body of their son, as delivered in little shipping packages. A junior academic turns into a small monkey and then a warlord in a different hemisphere, and a college student starts a hunger strike to impress an activist crush. In the collection's last story, The Haunting of Hajji, Hotak, Kochai addresses a surveilling spirit assigned to a family in West Sacramento, perhaps the same one. This spirit seems to know everything about the family, a sister's espionage, a brother's morbid YouTube habit, the father's infirmity. They're a whole lot, and the spirit wavers in this same mission of salvation. But in the end, when the old father falls from a ladder, the spirit saves his life. And after this, the father annoys his family with his search for the divine. Even as the family protests, Kochai writes, Hajji searches for you in shattered glass, in broken tile, in the strips of his wallpaper, the splinters of his doors, his tattered flesh, his warped nerves, and in his own beating heart where, through it all, the voice whispering that he is loved is yours. This simultaneous grasp, on the one hand, of the towering injuries of history and colonial violence as it stretches across continents and decades, and on the other, of the absolute imperative to love one another, even in our fears and frailties, and to search the world for its light, may strike some here or elsewhere as contradictory. But for me, it is one of the miracles of Kochai's work that these oppositions seem to make love and care and presence and humor and the plain joy of his words on the page neither hopeless nor triumphant, but all the more urgent, even in its confusion and difficulty. Nor do these virtues only appear in his work. Jamil has been here for only a couple of days, and more than one of us, myself included, has reflected on the extraordinary attention, generosity, and care he has shown to us and to our projects. To read his work has been to refresh our belief in the possibilities of art, and to know him has been to refresh our belief in the possibilities of our own making. Jamil John Kochai's work has appeared in The New Yorker, Zoetrope, and The Best American Short Stories, among many others. He is the author of The Haunting of Hajji, Hotak, and Other Stories, and 99 Nights in Logar. He has been a finalist for the National Book Award and the PEN Hemingway Award for Debut Novel, and is the winner of the 2023 Aspen Words Literary Prize, and at various times has been a Truman, Capote, Hodder, and Stegner Fellow. I am humbled and overjoyed to introduce to you now a writer from whom I believe we all have much to learn, Jamil John Kochai.
Sorry about that. First of all, thank you, Coralie, for that beautiful, beautiful introduction. It's really very touching. I want to thank the University of Utah. I want to thank the English department and the galley itself for hosting me here today. I want to thank all of you for blessing me with your presence. It continues to be a profound honor and a shock that anyone would show up to hear any of my work. And so, in light of the ongoing genocide in Gaza, where there has been entrapped a population of 2 million Palestinians, half of whom are children condemned from birth to live and then die inside of an open-air prison, I would like to read the following poem by the Palestinian-American poet Naomi Shihab Nye, The Small Vases from Hebron. And what do the headlines say? Nothing of the smaller petal perfectly arranged inside of the larger petal, or the way tinted glass filters light. Men and boys, praying when they died, fall out of their skins. The whole alphabet of the living, heads and tails of words, sentences, the way they said, Ya Allah, when astonished, or Ya Anni, for I mean. A crushed glass under the feet still shines, but the child of Hebron sleeps with the thud of her brothers falling and the long sorrow of the color red. I'm going to start today by reading from a story called Hungry Ricky Daddy. While our apartment hovered on the brink of a four-sided civil war over a miraculous microwave I'd bought at a flea market in Fremont, my little brother's best friend, Ricky Daddy, tried to live off of the food given out at student body meetings on campus. Mondays, it was the PSA, Tuesday, the ASA, Wednesday, the PSU, and Thursday, the ASU. Every Friday, the brothers from Davis got together after Juma for free pizza in the quad. See, Ricky Daddy, whose real name was Abu Bakr Salim, was saving up to buy an engagement ring for a Palestinian hijabi who'd barely spoken a sentence to him, not for his lack of trying, because the second or third intifada had left her heart immune to the temptations of his chiseled upper body. Not that there was anything wrong with our Ricky. He seemed to us quite lovable, with all the looks and charm of your average Pashtun fuckboy and the pure-hearted grace of an orphaned virgin. And even though, at first, we didn't believe the fact of his virginity, what with those curls, muscles, dimples, he swore to his celibacy often and without shame. It was more than his looks, though, that made us doubt him. We used to memorize his Instagram DMs as if they were verses from the Quran. One-liners, witty comebacks, emoji game like Jordan. All of that, and we were supposed to believe the kid still had his V card at 21. But my little brother Mahmoud swore that if Ricky's dick ever got wet, he'd know about it. We'd all know about it because Ricky couldn't lie if you made him say Wallah first. We demanded a demonstration. The 10 of us gathered in the kitchen and asked Ricky when it was the last time he jerked off. I don't jerk off, he blushed. Say Wallah, we said. He couldn't. Say Wallah you haven't jerked off in the past week. He couldn't. Say Wallah you haven't jerked off today. Please stop, he said. So he did, but only because we loved him. Even convinced of his virginity, we still couldn't figure out why exactly he wouldn't give up that dick. My brother, who'd switched to psychology to up his GPA for med school, explained that before Ricky's grandma died, she used to harp on Ricky nonstop about his dick and balls rotting away in the 7th level of Jahannam, saved exclusively for zina. We felt content with that explanation and accepted him as he came, our Ricky Daddy, virgin fuckboy. Despite his purity, Ricky's looks and his Instagram fame gave him a bad rep amongst the good girls on campus. That was why we thought Ricky had no chance with Nabila. Though, to be honest, we didn't know if you could call Nabila a good girl per se. I mean, she was on her deen and everything, roamed about campus, first year of her PhD in Islamic jurisprudence, head to toe in these dark outfits that revealed only her face, handsome, but pale and sort of bare, and her hands in her ballerina slippers. She prayed Fard, Sunnah, Nafil, everything, but we were pretty sure the girl was on like 6 different watch lists. She had an in with the Marxists, the anarchists, the Islamists, and might have been connected to Hamas back in Palestine. Because the FBI almost certainly had a tail on her, she kept a low profile online. No Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, where Ricky thrived, or even a Tumblr. Besides her revolutionary habits, There was also a rumor spreading among the Arab sisters that she already had a man waiting for her in Gaza, a cousin of hers, a rebel. We explained this all to Ricky, but he laughed it off. Rebels die young, he choked. Once he's gone, I'll swoop. But why swoop, we asked. Why her? She's 4 years older, 3 inches taller, and about 100 IQ points smarter. Ricky didn't say anything. He just smiled the way he did. His lips sort of parted, almost pouting, but his teeth still hidden. Our apartment had its own problems. See, there were 3 rooms in our place. Me and my brother and Ricky stayed in one room because we were all from Logar. None of us snored at night, and neither of them bothered me when I made dhikr or read Quran. Usually, Ricky would be quietly coding or texting while Mahmoud overstudied for exams he would almost certainly pass. Our 3 Arab buddies, Abed the Egyptian, Ikram the Syrian, and Yasin the Palestinian, stayed in their own room. As kids, they'd all gone to Masjid an-Nur together. Yasin was a bodybuilder who tried to make up for his fluffy eyebrows with stacks of muscles. He wanted to crush Israel between his bicep and his forearm. Ikram was an imam's kid, a former qadi addicted to kush. Each puff was another verse forgotten. Abid was like 8 different people. He wanted everyone on campus to love him, hippies, Nazis, Sufis, Salafis, Zionists, soldiers, frat boys. He did backflips at parties for no reason. 3 Pashtuns stayed in the 3rd room. 2 of them were twins on wrestling scholarships. They wore matching muscle shirts and skinny jeans, and whenever they went out for beers, they would come back in the night and get into fistfights over girls they'd claimed at bars. Zalmai was the 3rd Pashtun. A Kandari from Stockton, he kept a shotgun in his closet, filmed the twins fight every night, and uploaded these videos on YouTube for the ad money. Twins didn't even know. Fahim, an Indian kid from Elk Grove, shared the living room with Haidar the Kashmiri. Their rooms were sectioned off with curtains and they paid less rent than everyone else. While Fahim stayed up all night listening to Ahmad Didat and watching Gilmore Girls, Haidar worked on his rap album. They usually slept in the morning and got along pretty well because Haidar had developed a talent for ignoring Fahim's Islamic lectures and the whispering that emitted from his curtains whenever he phoned the white girl who was not his girlfriend. That was until the day Fahim brought the rabbit. He tried to sneak it in at night without telling anyone, but because the rabbit stayed in his room, or so we thought, no one bothered him about it. We all acted like the rabbit didn't exist, ignoring the shadow of its cage, the carrots in the fridge, the munching and squeaking and pooping. But then one morning, Haidar woke up with flea bites running up and down his legs. When he asked Fahim if his rabbit had fleas, Fahim responded with a 30-minute story about how the Prophet loved animals. Haidar, like always, let it go. But when the rest of us heard what had happened, we demanded an apartment meeting, which Fahim avoided for 2 weeks straight by hiding out at his cousin's place until we ambushed him at 2 a.m. as he was coming back to microwave some frozen dal. The twins put him in a headlock for 5 minutes before he admitted that the rabbit was in his car. Zalmai broke in, stole the cage, and hauled it away to Stockton. No one ever saw it again. After that, Fahim began to treat Haidar like shit. Wouldn't say salam to him, wouldn't lecture him, threw out his food on purpose, complained about his raps, woke up early in the morning to watch reruns of Ninja Warrior on full blast. Then, inch by inch, Fahim began to move his curtains into Haidar's side of the living room. Within a month, his room was about a foot wider than it had been. Haidar called an apartment meeting and showed us photos documenting the gradual extension of Fahim's curtains. He showed us the indentations in the carpet from where his dresser was moved 10 inches to the right. He showed us the bookshelf at the end of Fahim's bed that would never have fit in the beginning of the semester. He showed us the little holes in the wall where his rod used to hang. Haidar wanted his foot of space back. Fahim denied its existence. They both demanded a vote. Haidar had me, my brother, and 2 of the Arabs on his side, but the twins voted for Fahim because he was a TA in one of their Intro to Ethics courses. Zalmai, by default, also went with the twins, and so did Ikram, who never liked Haidar because he was a Shia. It was 5 versus 5. We needed Ricky to break the tie, but Ricky was busy. Having switched up his strategy with Nabila, Ricky had started attending any event he thought she might show up at. Marxist book clubs, SJP meetings, anti-police rallies, post-colonial theory courses. The plan was to prove himself during meetings and classes so that Nabila would see he wasn't a spy. Problem was he didn't know shit about anything, hadn't read through a whole book since Charlotte's Web, and yet, to our surprise, Ricky Daddy began frequenting the library. At first, he was mostly there on his laptop, reading Wikipedia articles and watching 10-minute YouTube documentaries about Palestine. He examined illustrated diagrams and sketch animations of Israeli land grabs and settlement extensions. He watched street executions and cell phone clips from the bombings in Gaza. He consumed as much of the internet info as he could until, eventually, he had to move on to real books. About a month into our apartment war, with Fahim still gradually eating into Haidar's space, my little brother decided to punish the opposition by confiscating our shared microwave. That's when shit really escalated. I bought the microwave for $15 at a flea market in Fremont, just hoping to nuke leftover kabali. But the radiation didn't just heat the food, it somehow made it tastier. Wallah, all you had to do was hit popcorn for any item and wait 7 minutes for your faith in Allah's providence to be restored. I could nuke a week-old slice of pizza and the thing would taste better than it had fresh. Everyone in the apartment knew the microwave was a godsend, something like a miracle. So when Mahmoud up and stole it away, our opposition sort of lost it. The night the twins returned to find the microwave missing, they almost wept, thought we'd been robbed. When they figured out my brother had stolen the microwave, they tried to break into our room. We had to use a dresser as a blockade. Then Zalmai, hearing the commotion and the horrific news, brought out his shotgun and aimed at our door. Not wanting to harm the microwave, the twins leapt at Zalmai just as he fired, pushing his shotgun toward the Arabs, who were all passed out inside. The shotgun pellets shattered their door. Zalmai fled. The Arabs attacked the twins. There was a tussle in the living room, and Haidar's curtains were torn, his laptop smashed, and his pleading ignored. Eventually, the twins got Ikram and Abed into arm bars and tied them up with Haidar's curtains and dragged them to the student clinic just before the cops arrived and beat the shit out of the Somalian brothers who lived next door. Poor guys got arrested. Me and Mahmoud stayed hidden all night and the next day until we managed to sneak out toward dark and took refuge in Ricky's fort of books on the 6th floor of the library. Mahmoud brought the microwave along. Ricky looked like shit. His curls were a mess. He had eye bags and yellow teeth. He was failing 3 of his CS classes, and he wouldn't shut the hell up about Palestine. He told us about the Ottomans and the Nakba and the Dar Yassin massacre. He told us about the PLO and the 6-Day War. He showed us on a map the borders of the apartheid wall, the locations of military checkpoints, and how the Israelis had separated Gaza and the West Bank like orphan siblings. He told us about the Brotherhood, the Intifada, the birth of Hamas, and the Oslo Accords. He read us recipes for mansaf, makluba, and musakhan. He told us about the capture of Leila Khalid, the assassination of Yassin and Rantisi, and the odd journey of Sheikh Abdullah Azam. He went on, well into the night, drawing from this book and that, reading us quotes, showing us pictures, bodies, massacres, walls, olive trees. We fell asleep to his reading poem in Arabic. By next morning, I'd forgotten everything he tried to teach me and went off to class. Later that night, my brother and I returned to Ricky's den for shelter, only to find himself researching university appeals cases on his laptop. Apparently, Nabila was getting expelled. An article in the Vanguard reported that she was filmed making anti-Semitic remarks when IDF veterans tried to disrupt a speech the SJP had organized in the Quad after an 8-year-old girl was run over by settlers in Nablus. A shouting match turned into a fist fight, turned into a brawl. The video was all over the internet. Toward the end of the blurred clip, someone who might have been Nabila shouted in Arabic, "May Allah destroy the Israelis." Her hearing was set for next month. But just a few days after the brawl, Nabila disappeared. Back in Palestine, we heard, to marry that cousin of hers. When we told Ricky, instead of sobbing as we thought he would, he was all questions. Who was the cousin? When was the nikah? Where would they stay? What would happen to the revolution? We didn't have those answers, but Yassin probably would. We messaged him on Facebook and he left us on scene until we offered the microwave in exchange for his intel. Our phones dinged like wind chimes. Yassin had spoken to his sister, who had spoken to her aunt in Jerusalem, who had found out that Nabila's cousin's name was Yusuf, that he was with the Islamic revival, that he was locked up without charge in an Israeli prison, and that, in fact, he just started a hunger strike about 6 days earlier to be officially charged with a crime. Nabila and Yusuf were set to be wed after his release, but until then, she would wait for her fiancé in the West Bank. The West Bank, Ricky asked. We showed him the messages again, expecting him to wallow, to bleed. Instead, the very next day, Ricky left the library, ordered 3 shawarma platters at Sam's restaurant, and announced his very own hunger strike during lunch. The strike began in our apartment. At the start of the winter break, when all our roommates except Fahim had gone home. We made a YouTube video announcing Ricky's intention to starve his body until Yusuf Muhammad was charged with the crime. He read a verse from the Quran, condemned the crimes of Israel in the US, lay down on an old tushak, and began to starve. We posted about the strike all over Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and waited. At first, nothing much happened. I suppose people thought Ricky might have been bluffing. But around the third day of his strike, when the hunger pangs and stomach cramps got so bad for Ricky, we thought he might give up. The Palestinian sisters started coming by, thanking Ricky for his bravery and snapping photos of his hunger. The pain in his face seemed to disappear into his dimples. About 6 days in, word started really spreading, and students from the MSA and ASA came to try to convince Ricky to stop, while students from the SJP and the ASU came to argue with those who came to convince him to stop. From time to time, distant relatives, we guessed, from the East Coast came to visit too. They entered his room, muttered for a while, and left dejected. Though none of them could have known about Nabila, each amma or khala or cousin made a passing remark about the folly of love. We didn't see them again. Then a reporter from the Vanguard came to do a story. Afghan student starves to free Palestinian terrorist. 3 days after that, someone left a pig carcass in our parking lot. Ricky's muscles started melting 2 weeks into the strike. The pangs in his belly had stopped altogether, and he felt nauseated and numb all the time. A few days later, a local channel gave Ricky an interview. Our original YouTube video was buzzing, and the article from the Vanguard spread from blog to blog. Supporters and haters gathered in a parking lot. They had protests and demonstrations and fistfights. Eventually, there were maybe 20 students staying in our apartment at all times, looking after Ricky. Even our roommates came home early. Yasin, pre-med, checked Ricky's pulse. Ikram read him Quran. The twins carried him from bed to bathroom. Zalmai called up some of his buddies from Stockton for security. Haidar bought him a $200 pillow. Abid did backflips, and me and Mahmoud were the only ones he'd let wash him. He was getting weaker by the day. Lightheaded and slow, he couldn't stand up so easily anymore. When I rubbed his arms or his chest with a washcloth, I thought his skin would tear free. Around the end of the third week, cops and doctors from the university hospital arrived at our place, demanding that Ricky eat, ready to force feed him with medical equipment the CIA used on prisoners in Guantanamo. But Ricky's followers all locked arms in front of our parking lot, and then our apartment, and then the door of our room, shoulder to shoulder, leaving no inch of space for the cops to pass through. They maced and beat a few of us, but we held strong for our Ricky. Then, on the 26th day of Ricky's hunger strike, Mahmoud secretly checked up on Ricky's resurrected Facebook page, 10,000 plus followers since the strike, when he saw a message request from an account without a picture that was just called Sister Palestine. He would have immediately ignored the message had it not started out by calling Ricky Abu Bakr Salim. At first, Ricky was upset about the secret Facebook account, but his temper quickly faded when he realized who had messaged him. He smiled, first time in a week, and started doing what he did best. For 5 hours straight, when he should have been reciting Quran or making dhiqr or contemplating the transient nature of the mortal body, Ricky texted Nabila. At the end of the day, Ricky asked Mahmoud to delete all his old photos and posts on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and even MySpace. After that, he went on, bring me a camera and link me up to a live feed. All right, Ricky, we said without question. And don't call me Ricky anymore, he said. My name is Abu Bakr Salim. Before we set up the live feed, we combed his hair and his beard, which now reached past his Adam's apple, and we washed his face and moisturized his lips, his vanity still breathing. And we got him ready to face the whole world just beneath the open window of our dingy little apartment. The speech he read was not his own. Nabila had sent it to him bit by bit on Messenger just hours before. Americans, it began. My name is Nabila Muhammad, wife of Yusuf Muhammad, who has been on hunger strike for 5 consecutive weeks. On his body is a medical device connected to a surveillance room operating 24 hours a day. His heartbeats are slow and may stop at any moment, and doctors, officials, and intelligence officers sit on every side of him, waiting for his end. I chose to speak to you, intellectuals, writers, lawyers, journalists, poets, and civil society activists. I invite you to visit my husband and see how he hungers. Americans, it went on, You may feel the impulse to write a story about my husband. You could write, for example, of his melting flesh, of his bared rib cage, and of his stuttering breath. You could write of his eyes that no longer belong to him. And after you write the story, you may publish it and add it to your curricula. And when hundreds of your students read it, they will believe that the Palestinian dies of hunger romantically, fanatically, and without sense. And you would then rejoice in this funerary ritual and in your cultural and moral superiority. But my husband was arrested and imprisoned without charge because it is the military that rules our lands and yours, and the intelligence apparatus that decides. And all the other components of society merely sit from a distance and watch so as to avoid the explosion of our criminal bones. For I have not heard one of you interfere to stop the loud wail of death and the quiet torture of our dark bodies. It is as if every one of you has turned into gravediggers, and everyone wears his military suit, the judge, the writer, the journalist, the merchant, the academic, and the poet. And I cannot believe that a whole society was turned into guards over our debts and our lives. Nonetheless, you may be sure, all of you hearing this, that we will die satisfied and having satisfied. We do not accept being deported from our lands. We do not accept your courts and your laws. If you have passed over our country and destroyed it in the name of a god or a principle, you will not pass over our elegant souls, which have declared disobedience. For the defeated will not remain defeated, and the victor will not remain a victor. History isn't only ever measured by battles and massacres and prisons, but also by the incremental blood drip of the thinnest veins. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Then we cut the feed and posted everywhere and waited. The video barely made a blip. The outrage over last month's police harassment had subsided after a boat of frat boys went missing somewhere along the Los Angeles coast. Abu Bakr wallowed in obscurity. His body had shrunk and he grew more reserved in his suffering. We couldn't seem to get through to him. It was like we were watching him float away, but inside himself. Our food began to taste like dirt, and our lives felt unforgivably stupid in the wake of his misery. We couldn't take it anymore. We joined the strike. First it was me and Mahmoud, then Yasin and Ikram, then Abid and the Pashtuns, then Haidar. Word got around, and by the time Abu Bakr Salim started losing his memory, we had over 100 Muslims starving with us across Davis and Sacramento. We began buzzing online again, and our movement turned statewide. We had students from all the UCs and CSUs joining the strike. By the 41st day, when he couldn't stop vomiting bile or shitting soft splatters of blood, our movement had become national. West Coast, East Coast, until around 6 weeks in, we had organizations in the UK and France striking with us too. A Syrian artist in Belgium took a still of Abu Bakr Salim's face from the video of Nabila's speech, sepia-toned it with an app, and put the image on a poster. The next day, people were wearing t-shirts and sweaters with Abu Bakr's starving face plastered across it. He still looked pretty then. On the 52nd day of Abu Bakr's hunger strike, bloody sores grew out of his back and swelled and burst open like hungry mouths. His beard and his curls had grown long and wild, and he seemed to go blind from time to time. Even though our apartment had been turned into a makeshift clinic with 2 or 3 doctors visiting us each day, we got so desperate to keep Abu Bakr alive, we began to microwave the 5 cups of chai he drank after each of the daily prayers, hoping its magic might keep his heart beating. If he closed his eyes for too long and stopped chanting Bismillah, we would rush to his side and hold a mirror to his lips and wait for him to open one eye and joke, "Is that me in there?" Through it all, the vomiting and shitting and lapses in consciousness, Abu Bakr kept on texting Nabila about God knows what because he could not let us see and would not let us type, though his fingers seemed to be on the brink of breaking. 2 months into our ordeal, Fahim finally joined the strike. About 5 minutes after that, so did the white girl who was not his girlfriend. A few hours later, CNN came to interview her. By that night, she had become a worldwide sensation. The next morning, Trump flew to Tel Aviv and personally requested that Netanyahu officially charge Yusuf Mohammed with the crime. So, after 68 days on strike, Yusuf Mohammed was formally charged with inciting violence because his protests had caused several riots in Gaza. He was moved to a district facility and with his left hand still handcuffed to the hospital bed Yusuf Muhammad, spokesman for the Islamic Revival, graduate student, poet, orphan, and husband, ended his fast with a date and a glass of milk before promptly dying of heart failure. Almost exactly 10 hours later, Abu Bakr Salim, formerly known as Ricky Daddy, ate a microwave date, drank a cold glass of milk, typed a message to Nabila, and stopped starving. My roommates and I were the ones who washed Ricky for the janazah. He had no other family. Me and Mahmoud did the istinja while the rest of the guys helped with wuzu. Only Fahim could not bring himself to touch Ricky's body, and so, instead, he kept filling our plastic water jug with hundreds of flower petals. 3 times we washed his body with lotus water and camphor, and then we trimmed his beard and cut his hair and brushed his teeth and cleansed his sores until his stench of death was smothered by tree bark and flower petals. Before the strike, Ricky once told us a story about Sheikh Abdullah Azam, who was killed in a car bomb in Peshawar, but whose body, it was said, was left without any mark or wound or blemish. And it wasn't that I expected Ricky's sores and bruises to disappear with his dying, but after he died and he wrapped his body in a kafan, I wanted so badly for his corpse to be perfect again that I could not bring myself to say the dua for the dead during his burial. In the end, he was so light, I swear to Allah, I could have carried him the 15 miles from the mosque to the grave by myself. I would have done it too, had my roommates let me. 2 days after Ricky died, I messaged Nabila's secret Facebook account. And for whatever reason, maybe she thought Ricky's account had been hacked, maybe she just didn't want to hear from me, she never replied. 7 months later, Nabila gave birth to a daughter in Bethlehem. Story went that just before the hunger strike started, she was able to smuggle Yusuf's sperm out of the prison in a disinfected candy wrapper. She never went on to marry. She took up her husband's former position as spokesman for the Islamic Revival, and due to the public nature of his death and her daughter's birth and her speeches, which became more striking with their accumulated years of suffering, and her habit of always wearing the full niqab so that almost no one on earth knew what she looked like, Nabila became a sort of icon. Her speeches and writings were collected into an award-winning book of essays, and after assisting in the Islamic Revival's takeover of the West Bank, which some say was orchestrated through the compliance of the IDF, she began her own splinter organization. Her followers worshipped her and swore by her immortality, though there were reports she had been assassinated by Mossad and that it was actually her daughter who had taken up her niqab and her position as the secret face of the Palestinian Islamist resistance. We never believed the rumors of her dying. In fact, over the years of her increasing fame, at one point or another, each of us from Ricky's apartment tried to contact Nabila in order to declare our love and offer our lives. We swore to be gentle husbands or loyal soldiers, and none of us ever married anyone else except for Fahim. Instead, I graduated from Davis, sought solitude at Zaytuna, lost faith in the white Sufis, went to Turkey, got caught up in the Civil War, came back to the States, was arrested for funding terrorism, tried to travel to Palestine, was denied entry, and eventually ended up in Afghanistan. In that time, I sent Nabila so many messages and letters and asked her so many stupid questions, I never thought she would read them. I asked, for example, if she loved Yusuf, and if Yusuf loved her, and if she loved him, what was it she loved? I asked her who he was and what he read. I asked her if her daughter was the second coming of Christ. I asked her if she ever watched the video of Ricky giving her speech. I asked her if she noticed how he'd combed his hair and brushed his beard. I asked her what she thought of the way he spoke her words. I asked her if she might let Ricky take her out on a date in Jannah after we all died. I asked her what Palestine looked like. I told her I imagined many rolling hills and olive trees and roads built of white stone. I thought he looked very beautiful, Nabila replied one morning some years after Ricky died, and then asked me who had moistened his lips. Just going to read one more story. Apologies, I've lost the story. Enough. Rangina does not know what to say to her brute of a son who will not stop shouting about pills or land or a stolen envelope of cash he meant to donate to the orphans of Logar because he's rambling now, absolutely rambling in front of her beloved daughters come all the way from Fremont to visit Rangina in this lonesome living room her son has decided to paint the most despicable shade of blue. Just sitting there, the poor girls, watching their old mother get harangued by her only living son on the earth, who is shouting, "I found the torn envelope in your drawer of photos." And of course, there's no way for her to respond to all of his accusations without weeping like the child she had been, once married off to a 60-year-old nomad at the precious age of 15 or 14, or who knows how old exactly, though Rangina did recall she was not too old to be playing with the dolls she fashioned out of clay from the edges of the rivers near where her youngest son would one day be murdered, when her mother approached her in a coat of ash or dust or snowflakes and informed her that within the year she would be married and moved and pregnant, again and again pregnant, leading to so many little unmarked graves in the apple orchard beneath the falling blossoms, as if Allah, all praise be to him, were saying, "Look, I know, but then there's this," until the baby stopped dying with the birth of her eldest son, the survivor, the rambler, still somehow rambling beneath the half-lit ceiling light he has failed to fix for the past 3 months, no matter how many times Rangina moans, "This darkness will swallow me," his massive frame blocking the television and the fake fireplace and the cabinet containing Rangina's favorite photograph of Hotak, his head shaved, his mustache barely sprouted, his soft lashes sparkling with frost, his lips slightly parted as if he is about to speak. But then his older brother, the survivor, speaks in his place, rambling about the pink pills from the Target CVS instead of the pharmacy at Rayleigh's, which was where Dr. Ahmadzi had sent all her medications before he died, before her eldest son moved the family out of their 3-bedroom house in Broderick to their 5-bedroom house in Bridgeway, despite the fact that she secretly preferred the smaller house and the bigger bedroom she shared with her eldest grandson, just 6 at the time, and so meek and so gentle, he would hold her hand every night to fall asleep. And then there were the ancient oak trees in the backyard and Faisal Market down the road, only a mile or so, a 15-minute walk for some dried mulberries or kishmish or fresh bread or a conversation with another Afghan. While in Bridgeway, she was surrounded for miles by nothing but her houses, her white neighbors and their houses, her white neighbors and their dogs and their houses, their vicious dogs always barking, always yapping and lunging, always on the brink of tearing away from their owners to rip open her insides like she had seen the communist dogs do in the pits of the orchards where her children had picked apples while searching for her eldest son who, thank Allah, all praise be to him, was not eaten by those dogs, or blown to pieces by the bombs, or shot near the bank of a stream, her white neighbor's dogs preventing her from going outside and taking a walk and shedding the pounds piled up on her belly and back and thighs, and, she supposes, the valves of her heart. Otherwise, why wouldn't her son stop rambling that she had forgotten to take her blood pressure meds, or had accidentally hidden them in the sheets of her bed, only for her son's snoop of a wife to find them one day and claim that Rangina was hoarding them to gift to her only living sibling on the earth, who, yes, perhaps, is an addict and a swindler and a wife-beater, but who also has very severe heart problems. And when you consider the state of Logar, that is, the ongoing years of bombings and shootings and random roadside executions, the Khalkyan, the Soviets, the Mujahideen, the Taliban, and the Americans, well, how could you blame her poor brother for deciding to steal? Is it even stealing? A small slice of the land that should rightfully belong as much to her as it does to her son, the rambler, and his viper of a wife, always watching, always listening, whispering, informing Rangina's brute of a son whether or not Rangina is taking her pills, or stockpiling her napkins, or shutting off her oxygen tank to keep from overheating, or waking up in the night unable to breathe, or telling the truth on the phone to her daughters, or spitting loogies directly beneath the corners of the carpets where no one looks, except, apparently, for her son's snoop of a wife, a Farsi one, like Rangina's mother, a weak-willed woman, her son's wife, laughs at everything, eats your insults, doesn't say shit to your face, but then reports every word back to her husband, who rushes Rangina, a big man, rambling about respect and kindness, though he certainly doesn't ramble very respectfully. Even now, even in this lonesome living room, finally filled up with all her children, rambling in front of her beloved daughters, come all the way from Fremont with their little babies just to see her, rambling so loud she can barely hear Alex Trebek say, on October 7th, 2001, Operation Enduring Freedom began in this country. By December, the US had dropped 12,000 bombs and missiles. With the weary resignation of a dying man, the same resignation she had seen in the long-haired boys she hid in her home, in the soft grass of the cow's pen, between ambushes and firefights, boys so young they could have been her sons, boys so beautiful they could have been dreams, all of them armed and dying and pretending to be prepared to die, and her son among them, her eldest son, just as beautiful, just as young, just as resigned to die in the wake of his younger brother's death, but now alive, now old, now ugly, now angry, now pacing up and down the living room, now yanking at his beard, now re-rambling along with their daughters, the traitors, about the pink pills Rangina has inadvertently lost, the pills he says are for her heart, but picking up on the words anxiety and mania and panic, words she remembered and repeated to her daughters, her trusting daughters, from whom she learned that the words referred to ailments of the mind, not the body, as if Rangina had become a madwoman, as if she couldn't beat her entire family at checkers, as if she weren't still memorizing surahs every night and day, as if she weren't at the very peak of her mental faculties, no matter what her son's wife had to say behind her back when she was talking on the phone in the yard, beneath the cherry tree, all day in the yard or in her bedroom or at her brother's house, leaving Rangina most days all on her own, in this house so empty, so dark, so quiet, her grandchildren in their bedrooms, playing games, watching TikTok, leaving her alone with her couch and her breathing tubes and her television and her favorite photograph of Hotak and her oxygen tank, which she had heard can sometimes randomly explode in this house made of sticks with its fences barely 6 feet high, barely an inch thick, completely incapable of protecting her from the neighbor's dogs or the registered sex offenders that live 2 blocks away, let alone burglars and rapists and Richard Ramirez and Eddie Gallagher and Robert Bales. Nothing like the walls of her home in Logar, 20 feet high, 4 feet thick, and strong enough to withstand rockets and missiles and bullets from the communists coming for her second eldest son, Hotak, whom they killed by the bank of a stream, near the water, rushing water, so heavy, so light, so early in the morning that frost still nipped the leaves and snowflakes fell mysteriously from the heavens, as Allah, all praise be to him, had intended, had always intended. But then there she is, her son's wife, complaining in whispers to her traitorous daughters about having to constantly lift Rangina's oxygen tank onto her dresser, then back onto the floor, then back onto her dresser, then back onto the floor, about the aching in her wrists, as if Rangina's withered lungs hadn't been ceaselessly aching since the night her body absorbed so much smoke and debris from Soviet cluster bombs. She had ash leaking out of her nose and ears and lips, a trail of ash following her from one end of the world to the other, from Logar to Peshawar, to Birmingham, to Hayward, to Broderick, to Bridgeway, to her favorite seat just in front of the television, blocked by her rambling daughters and her rambling son, and now his rambling son, that is, the very same grandson she had sung to sleep for 5 years, the same grandson whose ass she had wiped until he was in first grade, until they moved him into a room with his brothers in this too big house with its too many doors, too many windows, too many lights, too many televisions, too many memories, as in, for example, the night her son's wife discovered that her brothers had been murdered in Logar for nothing, for no one, in snowfall, just a mile or so away from the spot where Hotak had been murdered for nothing, for no one, in snowfall, 40 years earlier, and Rangina held her son's wife in her lap and wanted very dearly to tell her the story of how her own younger brother, the jokester, the prankster, laughing at everything, inventing jokes out of dust, out of horror, out of sorrow, had been pinned one snowy day between 2 trucks in Kabul, how his internal organs had been crushed and bled, but his heart kept pumping just long enough for him to look about, to raise his arms, to gesture for help, and to whisper a final message into the icy ear of a stranger who disappears forever, who might be dead, who might be living, just waking and sleeping and praying and eating and dying with Rangina's beloved brother's final words knocking about in his head with a summary of last week's episode of Ertugrul. Just another memory, a story that begins, but once in Kabul, amid snowflakes, a dying boy gestured. Not knowing that the dying boy was Rangina's dying brother, that those words, that story, belonged to her. But of course she didn't remind her son's sobbing wife of the story of the death of her brother or the death of Hotak, because Rangina knew what nobody knew, the weight of his body heavy with water, because she had heard the gunshots from her home, because she had known it was him before she had known it was him, because she had rushed onto the wartime roads like a madwoman, her hair unveiled, her nostrils burning with the stink of gunpowder and blood, because though Hotak was twice her size, she had lifted him out of the stream, all sodden and punctured, as light as the day she had birthed him, because Allah, all praise be to him, grants power to his bereaved, because she was the first to find Hotak, as if he were waiting for her. Then, now, there, here, her boy, her boys, forever silent, forever rambling, and Rangina wonders how much longer she is supposed to just sit and suffer her entire family rising up against her because she says enough before she shouts at her rambling son and his whispering wife and her nodding daughters and her muttering grandson, enough. Enough rambling, enough advice, enough pills, enough nightmares, enough lung damage, enough ghosts, enough beautiful dying boys, enough bomb smoke, enough burning apple trees, enough staring white neighbors, enough heavy breathing, enough Hotak, enough panic attacks, enough addict brother calling for money, enough spite, enough grudges, enough heartaches, enough dead, enough sins, enough son's wife having to wash her in the tub because she can no longer stand up under her own weight, enough waffles, enough Hotak, enough ongoing occupation, enough Taliban, enough Bushes, enough Clintons, enough Masouds, enough puppet presidents serving white masters, enough Hotak, enough unanswered prayers, enough brothers' jokes turned into sad stories, enough aching in knees, in back, in lungs, in heart, enough breathing tubes, enough inhalers, enough pills, enough beaten mothers, enough gunshots in films, enough wounded, enough babies dying, enough hateful eldest son, enough rambling, enough advising, enough calming, enough loving, enough hating, enough generations of grown children rambling, enough, Rangina shouts and rises up out of her seat and strips off her breathing tubes and limps outside, her children at her back, at her sides, circling and pleading and still somehow rambling. Where? Over and over. Where? Her stupid children and her stupid grandchildren, her whole stupid family, too big, too small, too loud, too quiet, too fast, too slow, to Logar, she says without saying, and climbs into one of her son's salvaged Civic sedans and grabs the key out of the cup holder where he always keeps it and almost runs over her daughter backing out of the driveway. She straightens the car in the cul-de-sac and spots her son running toward her from the house. Shifting the car into drive, she plans to head down Brother Island Road, onto Golden Gate, onto Jefferson, onto the freeway, onto I-80, onto SFO, into the international terminal toward the Turkish Airlines ticket counter, where she'll unstitch a seam in her purse and pull out a stolen bundle of cash meant for the orphans of Logar, and buy a first-class ticket to Afghanistan. In Kabul, she'll exchange her dollars for Afghanis and call for a taxi and pay extra to travel down to Muhammad Agha, to her old village in Nawe Kale, to the bank of the stream where Hotak once died, and she'll climb past the chinar trees and down into the water and stare up at the leaves and the birds and the clouds and the jets and the ghosts and the drones and the angels and the cosmos and Allah, all praise be to him, and she will float in peace and in silence, except, apparently, for the blasting of a car horn her eldest son had failed to repair only days earlier. The same eldest son is now slumped beside Rangina in the salvaged Civic she has just crashed into the pole of the lamplight she watches every night from her bedroom. The horn blares louder as the rest of her family surround her car and are once again, but her boy, her firstborn, the one who lived through the cold, through the hunger, through the mountains, through the war, her survivor, her rambler, is so quiet it stirs her dying body into action. Shards of windshield tumble from her arms and shoulders like the first snowflakes of a new season as she reaches out to feel for the pulse of her only living son on the earth. Thank you.